musicians are delicate people, very emotional. Their music's really important to them, as it should be. And the work that you do should be important to you as well. And so if you can build that trust with somebody and somebody trusts you with their project, the kind of expectation there is that you're going to do a good job on that, and you're going to fulfill what you say that you can do. And as you get better at selling your services and stuff, selling yourself, you build those relationships, get repeat clients, et cetera, et cetera.
You're listening to the GWNL-Podcast. Guys with no lives talking about audio.
Hello and welcome to episode 13 of GWNL-Podcast. I'm Joe.
I'm Ben.
And I'm Bryant.
And we're going to talk to you guys today about one of our favorite topics that we get to have with clients. It's called Good, Fast, and Cheap. Pick 2. Welcome to audio. Thank you for coming. And that's our whole podcast for today. Thank you for coming. See you guys next week. No, I'm just kidding. So Good, Fast, and Cheap, Pick 2. Ben, why don't you explain this one? Because you're the one who told me that.
Yeah, this one is not just in the audio industry, but pretty much any service industry. This saying holds true. And it's kind of this universal law that everybody tries to break, but is unbreakable. And so it's really simple because there's 3 things: good, fast, cheap. And you can only do 2 at a time. So if it's good and fast, it's not going to be cheap. It's going to be expensive. If it's fast and cheap, it will not be good. If it's good and cheap, then it'll take forever. It's not going to be fast. And so that's kind of this universal thing. And everybody tries to like circumvent it and get around it and be like, oh, I want something really good and really fast, and I don't want to pay any money for it. And the universal part of it is that there's no way for them to just like they think, oh, well, I got this great deal because it's good. It was good and fast, and I didn't pay any money for it. And it's like, that's great, but guess what? You just totally screwed over the person that was doing the work. So somebody gets screwed if you break the rule. If you break that, if you try to break it.
Yeah.
So it's kind of
someone gets broken if you break that rule.
Yeah.
Yeah. So part of that comes from not properly setting expectations with your clientele, which is kind of our first point tonight. Managing and setting client expectations. So Bryant, I think you've had some great experiences with dealing with that kind of a thing. What's your take on that, managing and setting client expectations?
As far as that goes, when you're starting out, you don't always know how to do that, and it's kind of learning how to navigate relationships. Because that's essentially what you're doing. You're not just selling yourself. You're not just selling a service. You're also selling yourself and the relationship between you and whoever you're working with, your clients. And that's the biggest thing to get return clients or return customers is to build that relationship. And so part of that is like learning how to set expectations, and basically at the beginning with the first time you meet somebody, you need to ask qualifying questions. You need to find out kind of what their project is about. You need to find out what they're trying to accomplish. And in some cases, you can bring up budget, but budget shouldn't necessarily be one of the biggest things that, if a client's like biggest issue is like budget and they're really like budget conscious, usually they're probably not going to be somebody that you want to work with. In my experience that I've had. But anyway, I do have a story about, when, setting expectations as far as rates go, and then having to change that later on. And luckily in this case, the client that I was working with was super understanding, really cool. I was just starting out. It was one of my biggest, first big projects that I had. And it was one of my first paying projects. So I didn't really know know how much time this project would take. I didn't really know how to value my time in this, or how to kind of give them a rate. So I just gave them a project rate, ended up doing $500 for the whole project. And halfway through this, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm way in over my head. This is not even near enough money for the nature of this project. And so I ended up renegotiating with the client and ended up renegotiating for double that, which was still pretty low. I ended up, I basically made about $5 an hour on that project. And I still ended up being happy with that kind of a rate because it was one of my first ones. I was still in school, but I didn't initially set that expectation correctly at the beginning, so I had to go into that renegotiation process and explain why things were taking so long. We hadn't even finished with the tracking process yet, and ended up working out in my favor in that case. But that's not always the case. Sometimes you'll have people. I have a friend that does videography that did a project for somebody and initially quoted them for something. He went through the whole qualifying process, qualified them, delivered on what they said, and then they asked for a bunch of revisions, and he kind of let them walk all over him in that sense. And he said, hey, you guys didn't say you wanted this up front. Well, you guys didn't say you wanted this kind of a thing. This is going to cost way more. And the person was like, well, you gave us this like initial price for this, so you're stuck on that kind of a thing, and tried to weasel him in that and wouldn't budge. And he ended up delivering anyway, and really destroyed that relationship because he got taken advantage of in that case. So
yeah, there it is.
Those are tough. Yeah, what were you gonna say, Joe?
Well, no, I think about it because like I had a very different experience because when I started managing clientele or dealing with clientele, I at least was working in a company where I had other engineers that could kind of guide me on that, and so I got a lot of great learning from people who are very seasoned, jaded, bitter audio engineers. No, they're great guys. I miss a lot of my old coworkers, but I learned a lot from that, and I learned about how many people will screw you over in audio. And I've learned that it's not always because they're trying to get one over on you. There's obviously those people out there when you're dealing with clients that they're trying to get a deal, right?
Yeah.
So you tell them that just tell them you're giving them a deal, and you're like, oh yeah, I knocked like 10% off. They don't know. It's not like they like. You could put that on their like invoice, and they'd be like, oh yeah, 10%. They don't know your rates unless you have them posted. So there's that. But anyways, don't generally lie to your customers, but sometimes when people are trying to get one over on you, you just play the game, right? But I actually, I was lucky in that regard because not everybody else was. Not everybody else was working in a company at that phase in their career and like had to deal with it on the front lines every day like I did. I always had people coming in, and I remember this one kid that was like coming in to rent a microphone. He's like, oh yeah, so can I rent a Avalon VT737 and a U87? I was like, yeah, it's going to cost this much. He's like, can I demo that? And I was like,
the demo.
He's like, can I demo it for the weekend? And I was like,
that's
so you
rental.
can record your, yeah, like that's what I was like. I'm like, that's a rental, and no, unless you're going to pay us, it's no. And at that point I was like seasoned enough to kind of catch that. I mean, I still miss things, and like my coworkers had to like clear me up on some stuff, but that was like one of those instances where you start to pick up on that stuff and you start to realize when people are taking advantage of you and respond to that. I've ran into a lot of instances where lately I have a lot of clientele that. Right. So let me scale back a second. Forget my current clientele. There are a lot of different amateur people who want to hire you for your services. And I think I might have brought it up in a prior podcast, but you have people who don't know anything and they want the world and they think they know everything. Those are like the worst clients you're probably going to run into a lot of the time because they're the type of people who will just continue hammering you and hammering you and hammering you to get what they want. Regardless of the good, fast, and cheap, right?
They'll do like oh man, I think that the bass is just like half a decibel too hot. You need to turn the bass down by like half a dB. Oh, and then the hi-hat, I need you to turn that up like 3.25 dB. And then can you like EQ some of those high frequencies out? It's kind of like a little harsh.
Yeah, I know that.
Well, and
so you have those. Yeah, go on. Sorry, man.
Yeah. Sorry, can I interject for a second?
Sure, yeah. Hit it.
And that's what like a lot of times in my experience with this kind of ties into the hourly versus project rate. I've had those discussions where the person is like, well, how much, is it per mix, per song to mix, And I finally I told the person, I've had to tell people, I'm like, when I give you a per song mix rate, I am basically like trying to figure out in my head or on paper how many hours it's going to take me to do this mix for you. And then I'm, multiplying that amount of hours by my usual hourly rate. And that is the estimate. And either I mix it really quick and I get more money than I really, should or something, or than I would have, or it takes forever, really long, and then I get way less money than I should. So like the project rate is like designed to rip one of you off.
Right.
And it's like either I'm going to quote you too high and we're going to do it fast, and then I'll get all this extra money for not doing, or it's going to take forever and you're going to get this great deal. So I'm like, why don't we just do the hourly rate and then you can get exactly what you pay for?
I would even say, though, the hourly rate, depending on, and you've brought this up in the past, hourly rate for like lower skilled individuals who take longer to do things becomes more unfair to the purchaser, in this instance, to your client. Yeah. You have to kind of run that gambit of, do I have enough experience do I have enough skill in this scope with this project, like this recording or this mix, whatever, this session, to be able to get it done within a reasonable amount of time. That's why like the project rate kind of can be beneficial to newer people. I think you've said this too, where it's good to set people. Because then you have the luxury of taking your own time to learn things and still delivering on a good product. Whereas if you're giving them an hourly rate, now they're kind of paying for you to learn. They're basically paying for you to go to school. And in this instance, that's not necessarily fair to your client. And so you kind of run that gambit of, do I go with a project rate? Do I go with an hourly rate? And for new project, that's a hard one to kind of say. Because I agree, like, it just depends on how it's going.
Yeah, and I really think it depends on that, because, there comes a point where it's like, yeah, I could, if I prefer a project rate as far as mixing goes, but when I'm tracking, I want to make sure I do things hourly, because I know that it's not always just waiting on me in that case. Sometimes you get unpracticed, unrehearsed musicians that want to do take after take after take. And so
oh my goodness.
In that case, when I'm tracking, when I'm doing tracking or editing, I'm doing an hourly rate. But when it comes to mixing and mastering, I like to do a project rate, because I feel like I kind of have a general sense of how long it takes me to do most songs in general. And I know every song is unique and comes with their own problems and stuff, but generally it takes me, X amount of time per mix, and it's kind of averaged out. And so for me, I like a project rate for that reason. And for the clients that I work with, have worked with, they usually are pretty good on that.
It is different when you're running in a live sound environment when it comes to the scope of the project, the job, and those environments. There are, I definitely know people who've worked day rates for shows, and they've also worked hourly rates. It just depends on the company. It depends on who your client is that you're working for and what they can afford. I know that, sorry, you want to say something?
Well, I was going to say, there was a particular company that only paid a day rate that I used to work for. Mm-hmm. And there were some times that I would, work an 8-hour day, and it was like, oh, that's awesome. But there's other times I'm getting paid the same and I'm working like a 17 or 18-hour day. And it's like, I just got paid $200 for an 18-hour day. I'm basically making $10 an hour today.
Yeah. And you have to realize that there are those kinds of conflicts. Like I think the highest paying gig I did was, I think $2,100 for 1 day's worth of work, but it wasn't 1 day's worth of work. So even though I ended up getting paid like a pretty good amount for basically 16-hour day, which wasn't bad. I mean, $2,100 for 16-hour days, I'm still making pretty good money. Yeah. I remember weeks, like a week or two of planning and preparation that goes into that. So in reality, I'm not just getting paid for that. You have to remember that as a sound engineer, because you have to deal with the logistics of those things a lot of the times. And so you have to consider all that planning and preparation time as a part of that pay. So I kind of broke even ultimately, especially with the risk that I signed for on that gig. I don't regret it. They're good friends, and I left it well. It was just really stressful, and I didn't sleep that night. I knew a lot was riding on me, and it was one of those things that definitely
Well, and that's what, like, I've done a lot of DJing, and it's like, if you look at the DJ rate that you get and like how many hours, it's like, whoa, you're getting a lot per hour. But then you have to think of, I mean, number one, there's the equipment and the experience, which is something we haven't even gotten into yet. But just going that DJ that day is like making sure your equipment's ready beforehand, loading up your car, driving to the venue, loading in, doing the event, loading out, driving home, and so I'd have things where, especially when I worked for this other company, and they give me it was like, I can't remember, it was like 15% or 30% of what we was bringing in. So sometimes like $60 or $70. And I spend like a whole Saturday starting at like 2 p.m, get home at 2 p.m.
12 hours?
It's
No
like 12
way,
hours,
man.
12 hours of time.
Ah.
And I get paid $60, and I'm like, that's $5 an hour,
Yeah.
And that was the rare occasion. Usually I got paid better than that. But there were some times where I just like, I have to factor all this in, the travel time and stuff too. And it's like, I had times where you're just like stressed about the gig during the day. And so you don't really get anything done until it happens. But that's all stuff to factor into, and especially with live sound stuff, where you may be sitting around for a while.
Yeah, because you'll be like, hurry up to get the whole show set up,
Yeah.
and then you're waiting until the show starts. And unless there's something going wrong, there's nothing for you to do. Like,
Yeah.
But you need to be paid for that time that you're there.
and whoever else is there working with you, you have to consider those things. And I'm not even I'm sorry, but there's even more to consider, because you're just thinking about that job and what you're getting paid for that job, but you need to think about your medical bills. Like, if this is your full-time job, if you're not just doing this as a hobby, you have to think about things like bills, your 401k, like longer term planning for those things. This is why I took the current job that I'm in right now, because it's got a lot more stability and a lot more benefits. But there are so many things you need to consider as you consider your job and the pay that you're getting paid for that gig, especially in live sound. And I'm sorry to cut you off, Ben. I'm very passionate about this, because I mean, that's part of the challenge of being a freelance engineer. As even if you're working with a company, you have to calculate those things out, because I had an option to go back to my old company, which, for the record, if any of my coworkers happen to turn on this, I miss you guys. You guys are great. I miss working with you guys. It was not because of you guys that I left. I love every single one of you at my old gig. I loved all of you. But I had to think about my future, and that was what ultimately led me to the job that I'm currently in, because it's a lot more stable, especially as an audio engineer. Every first and 15th, every day, every month, I get the same paycheck, and it goes up regularly. It's a consistent gig. It's been as frustrating as some of the things have been for me. And and he laughs because I know. Yeah, he's heard a lot about it. As bad as that is, and as frustrating as it is, I can't argue with the consistency and the stability that this job has brought to me as an audio engineer. It enabled me to keep working when almost all my other friends were switching to other jobs or doing different things in audio, or not even doing audio. So it's very important to know and to think about those things, calculating out, okay, you're not going to calculate your health insurance off of every gig, but you need to know your premiums, and you need to know how much you're paying per quarter, so that you can calculate out how much you need to make from your gigs. And you need to realize that most live sound people are going to work more during the summer than they are during the winter. I don't think this is nearly the same battle you're going to have in studio work. It comes down to your marketing and other things.
But there are seasons.
Yeah.
There are seasons when people do more studio work and stuff too. So it's not just steady all the time. Depends.
But there's more potential to keep it relatively consistent.
Yeah. I mean, part of that comes down to, as far as the studio work goes, your skill, your marketing, and your ability to sell your services, which takes a lot of time and effort to be able to put into that, because you're literally running a business. Well, even as a freelance live sound engineer, you are a business.
Yeah.
And so part of that is networking, marketing yourself in a way to get hired for those jobs.
Managing relationships with other clients, and
it
not
all
just
comes
flying
down
off
to
the handle.
relationships.
I hate relationships with anyone.
Network.
Except for my wife.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think we've got on some interesting side things, but one thing I wanted to bring up that actually it was funny because it actually happened today is along with that whole the project rate, because you're early on in your career and you're going to spend more time on it. So there's this whole debate that always happens between the client that wants like free stuff or discounted stuff with students.
I know who this is.
No, that's not. This is you don't even know this guy that
Okay.
came in today to the school and talked to me about this project. And I was just like, you just want this to be done for free, And it was nice. I got the chance to tell him about my studio, and it's like, my studio is the only professional studio in this county, and so you can come and do the stuff there. He's like, oh, well, that's too expensive, And I kind of worked out a thing where he wasn't going to take advantage of the students, and it was going to be for their project. And there's both sides of it. One side is the person wanting to do this. They use the student, and they feel like they get taken advantage of if they have to pay them money, and then they take way too much time, or they don't do a really good job, and then they feel like they're getting taken advantage of. And then on the other side, the person is trying to get all this free stuff, and the student is just like slave laborer, then it becomes problematic. And the funny thing is, he'd actually had an experience with a student a year ago, and his idea of it and what I'd heard from the student were two different perspectives. And so
interesting.
I was trying to say, I'm like, well, yeah, there's both sides. And he was like, no, the student was like ripping me off. And I'm like, that's not quite what I heard from the other. So it was kind of interesting conversation. It totally ties into this. And it really is like this balancing act, especially when you're getting your 10,000 hours. What is that? That to master?
Yeah, it's Malcolm Gladwell, 10,000 hours. And it's not just 10,000 hours of doing something. It's 10,000 focused hours. That's another big thing you got to remember. But
kind of along those lines of what you've been talking about, Ben, is, part of our job as like audio engineers and as businesses is to educate people on, basically the market value. And a lot of people in, those remote areas, you're kind of in a remote area, not really, but it's definitely remote.
It's remote.
And like you're the only recording studio in that county. And I think you're the only recording studio in
a couple counties.
Couple counties that
like
are neighboring
4 or
that.
5 counties.
And so I don't know exactly what your rates are, but people there might think that your rates are expensive. But if you go up further north where there's some more established studios, you find some studios that are running, $100 an hour or $1,200 for the day, or $80 to $95 an hour. I know that there was a particular studio that recently, when I originally went to it, they were charging $85 an hour, and then he sent out a mass email to all of his clients just saying, "Hey, I'm having a price increase this next year. I'll be charging, this much." And he was at that point in his career where he could keep, he just had too many clients. So kind of to shave down on his clients, he raised his prices.
Yep.
Yeah.
I've been there. It's nice.
That's a nice technique. And it's important to realize that too, like as you expand, it's not wrong to increase your prices. Likewise, here's another thing I learned, and I've explained it to my wife because she runs her own like teaching piano business, and we've talked about how you want to maintain relationships with people who are close. Like she works with people who are close friends of hers, that are close family friends of ours, and so she wants to give them a deal, but she still has to make money as a teacher, and so she's found kind of like a way of calculating it out where she does like prizes for her students, and then if they do well they get a prize. Well, because now she's doing it through like Zoom, she doesn't have to worry about giving them prizes, so she knocks off some of the price for that. She knows that she's teaching full lessons for 3 students, but she has a 4th student that's a really young kid, so she doesn't charge them full price. And so she finds ways of like still getting value out of that contract, because ultimately your goal as any kind of an audio engineer working freelance or in any kind of industry is so that both people benefit from this interaction. It's to prevent one person from getting taken advantage of, whether it's you as an engineer or them as it's not, we're going to try and prevent that person from receiving the best quality they can and get as much money out of it. That's not what we're getting at here. And I hope nobody takes it away that way, but it's that both people can have a beneficial agreement with this contract that you're creating as you discuss your prices. And again, part of that is knowing yourself. Part of that is knowing the project. Part of that is understanding and being able to calculate out and foresee all of the things that are going to be associated, the difficulties of that job, that gig, that session, whatever it is. Like, if it's, sorry. Go on. Well, jump in.
Sorry, I was going to say, it's just like what I was saying with the project rate to mix, and like either I'm going to mix it really quick and get a sweet deal, and he's going to get taken advantage of, or vice versa. So, it's just figuring out that miracle of trade where both of you get something out of it. Like I get money, and they get,
a good product,
and we both feel like we got a good deal.
Also, it is not wrong to not do your best work if it's not always necessary. And that's going to sound wrong to some people, and some people might balk at that. But I mean, like you're saying, some clients, like, think about it. If some grandma is just recording something for her kid, don't get me wrong. Don't screw that old lady over. I'm not suggesting that. But I don't think that's the same level of like you don't need to approach it the same way you would approach like recording Led Zeppelin. I don't freaking know.
Yeah, it's the good versus good enough. So one of the experiences I had on that, I was doing some Latin music for an app, and they wanted like these different kind of bachata, merengue, and salsa, and so I had to like figure out how to compose Latin different in those different styles, and it was
good luck learning an entire. Oh man,
it was a fun project. But like I was working on it, and I had like gotten it, and I was wanting to make sure I was on target, so I gave the guy this reference, and I had like this classical guitar. It was like MIDI classical guitar in there, and I was gonna put a real classical guitar, in there, and the guy was like, "Yeah, this is awesome," and I was like, "Okay, cool, just there it is." So I just finished it up, and I didn't change it to a real classical guitar. I just used the MIDI classical guitar, and I even had it. I talked to a mentor at the time because I was younger in my career, and I explained it, and he's like, "If they think it's good, then it's good. If they're happy with it, and you don't have to feel like bad for not delivering the top notch." Like to me, I'm like, I need to have, not MIDI sounding.
Everything is real.
Yeah, it has to
everything
be real.
is recording.
And if it's not real, it has to sound really real, But it was just an app, and the MIDI acoustic guitar, MIDI classical guitar was plenty fine,
I get that, and I mean, it was different for me when I didn't have this consistent gig because I could as long as the client was happy, I didn't care. That sounds really bad. I didn't even care how it mixed or turned out with. And there were some times where even the client I couldn't make happy. Brian, you were in one of those gigs with me, and goodness gracious, that was one of those days where, oh my goodness,
that was a crazy day.
That was the second time too. That was the second time with that client. It was. I feel like he hated me, but he just kept because of like the people that kept hiring both of us didn't know that we didn't get along, but we just kept getting put into shows together, and he didn't like me. I could tell. And it was like the second time I had done that with him. Anyways, he wasn't a bad guy. I bear no ill will, but it was just sometimes you're stuck with a bad situation and there's nothing you can do about it. And you know what? You finish the gig.
Yeah, that's true.
Yep.
We're going to let Bryant talk. It just keeps going back and forth.
I let him talk a lot in the beginning.
I've talked a little bit.
You had something you were going to say, and I jumped in, and then Joe jumped in, and I jumped back in. So
trying to remember it.
It's gone.
I guess it wasn't important. I think it was another story that I had, but it's okay. Not important.
We have lots of stories, and I've only worked for 7 years, and I have a lot of stories. Gosh dang.
My main thing is, I was going to talk about like a good client that I've had. I have this client that I've mixed. He doesn't do it anymore. He's kind of like put his project on hold, but he does Cantonese rap.
That's super rad.
Cool.
And he kind of the first song that he ever did, he ended up going to like a really big studio and paid a lot of money, and paid way more than what I charge, and he like got like a good product that he liked. And then the second song that he did, he went to a different studio, didn't really like it that much, but paid just as much money. And anyway, we were talking about what he was up to, and I told him my rates. And he's like, "Oh man, that's awesome." And then like, it was like the easiest client that I'd ever had. I mean, he was like really well rehearsed, and he's not like, he's like, "I don't know anything about music. Like, can you like coach me through this? Can you like help me sing this part? 'Cause I don't know how to sing." And I'm like, "Sure. Yeah." And I like helped him like get through this particular part. That's why he mainly like does rap. Right. He's like, I can't sing, man.
Just throw the auto-tune on, right? And then we talk about that.
Yeah, that fixes everything.
And anyway, when I gave him the first mix, he's like, "Oh man, this sounds really good." He's like, "You did something here. What did you do here?" I was like, "Oh, well, like I did like this cool thing where I took this like chord from your beat and I like reversed it to kind of swell into this part to give more impact." He's like, "Dude, that is so freaking cool. Can you do this like for every chorus?" I'm like, "Oh, sure, yeah." And that was like his only note. Was like, "I really like that. Can you put that in every chorus?" And I did that and then sent it to him, and he's like, "Sweet, yeah, there we go." And he like paid up front for it. Didn't have any hassle trying to get his payment up front. He's like, "Oh yeah, sure, here." And then like, since we did tracking, I was like, "Hey, so you got to pay me for the like, a deposit. It's you for what you're wanting to do. I'd imagine it'd take about 4 hours. So you got to pay like 50% up front." He paid 50% up front and then paid the rest at the end of the session. And then was like, "How much is it to mix?" And I told him my rate, and he paid that up front. And I was like, "Sweet, cool, there we go." And then I kind of talked to him about mastering a little bit. And he was like, "Oh, should I get that?" And I was like, I'll do like a quick master for you."
Yeah.
But he was like so chill that one of my favorite clients, even though he knows nothing about music and was like the least technical and like least skilled musician that I've worked with. Well, musician, because he doesn't consider himself a musician either. It ended up being one of my favorite things I did, and it sounds pretty good, honestly. I think he did like some pretty good work with having some like no training.
Yeah, some of those rappers are really good without necessarily tons of musical skill. They have rhythmic and lyrical skills and stuff that can come across.
Being able to pay attention. I want to hit on one thing though that I think was super important that Bryant brought up in what he was talking about with clients, like just the fact that like you're not always going to have that kind of a golden client, and that's not because every client's bad. Like that, just realize that, and like you're going to have a lot of different clients, and you have to make them all feel like $1 million in their own right. And that's part of managing those relationships. And I'm not saying be fake with these people or lie to them, because they'll sense that. People will sense that. You can't fake this stuff. You have to be real with them, but you don't have to be cruel. And I definitely fall into the camp of maybe being a little too honest to the point of cruelty to some people, everyone. But don't stress yourself out by like, "Oh, this guy has such good clients." Don't compare yourself to other people. Don't get lost in that game. That's not going to help you as an engineer. And
that one client was like one. Like I've only ever had that good of a client once.
Yeah. And then one other thing, because I know we're running out of time on this. It is difficult today in today's environment because people have a lot more access to technology for recording. It is difficult for people who don't work in industry positions already. So like I was lucky to work in a company early on in my career. Some people won't, like some people who are just doing their own like studio in their own backyard or whatever, or in their own bedroom. You're not necessarily going to know what your rates are going to be. and you're not exactly going to have like an infrastructure to figure that out. Like, you know, you could talk to your buddy who like kind of does this for fun. This is a difficulty that a lot of people run into, because in the past, a lot of people learned audio through like internships and like being in the studio with other people and watching as things happen, and you kind of rise up through the ranks. That doesn't happen so much anymore. And that's where things are difficult. Like the prices that I had where I used to live are not the same prices in the place that I'm at now, and they're not going to be the same prices if I go to another place. You know, like if I end up in Texas or New York, those pricing structures are going to be completely different, and both in studio, live sound, and all that other stuff. And so it's difficult, because if you start asking other companies like how much they charge, they're going to be like, no, I'm not telling you how much I charge. Like, it's kind of like, it's not trade secrets, but it's basically trade secrets and stuff. And you have to watch out for that and realize that it's difficult when you don't have that infrastructure to pull from, when you don't have like a professional company or someone who's been in this industry for a long time. Sorry, as I shake my desk, to kind of get that information from, and just realize that you're just going to have to work with your best estimate, and realize you're going to make some mistakes along the way, and hopefully, you know, manage those relationships so that you don't lose out on clients. Good clients, bad clients we don't care about unless they pay you a lot of money, in which case I'll care about them a little.
Maybe a little, yeah.
Maybe.
Well, and that's go ahead.
I was just gonna say that like the biggest thing, it comes back to what I said earlier, is like knowing your value and kind of where your skill set is valued at with your current skill set, and how to sell that to, you know, potential clients. It's really about learning how to sell yourself and build those relationships with clients that will be able to, you know, trust you with their project, because musicians are delicate people, very emotional. Their music's really important to them, as it should be, and the work that you do should be important to you as well. And so, if you can build that trust with somebody, and somebody trusts you with their project, you know, the kind of expectation there is that you're going to do a good job on that, and you're going to, you know, fulfill what you say that you can do. And as you get better at selling your services and stuff, selling yourself, you build those relationships, get repeat clients, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. So my last words, I really wanted to bring up the concept of respecting your client and making them. We've kind of hit on some of this, where you make them feel like you're being really generous. And so like for me, what I do is, you know, I like most of the stuff I do at rate, you know, hourly rate based. But then I'm really like generous with the rate. And I've been training my assistant here to run the studio for me, and we talked about this stuff so I could get him to do the same kind of thing, because it's worked really well for me in the past, like where people almost feel like you're being so generous that they'll pay you extra money. So like on the hourly rate. So let's say that we're doing a session, and like it's we're at the 2-hour mark, and we go like 10 minutes over the 2-hour, you know, and I'm like, okay, let's just 2 hours, you know. And then, like, if anything goes wrong, like if there's any technical difficulties, I'm always like, oh, yeah, well, it messed up, so let's cut a half an hour off of that total time. Fair. And so when I do that, and you almost, you know, do more than you should cut off, then, I mean, I've had people, like, give me tips and pay. Like, I'm like, it's $100, and then, you know, you look on the Venmo, and they sent you $120 or something. So I have that happen all the time, which is a good thing. There's kind of this technique that is an audio technique that it kind of applies to it. So when you're doing like ads, like commercials and stuff, and you know the voiceover is the most important thing. And if you try to put the music too loud, like to be up there with the voice, the producer will always like tell you to put the music down, you know? And they'll keep on making it push it down for lower and lower. But if you start with it really low, then they're like, turn the music up. So it's that same concept of like, I really would like the music to be here, and I want my pay to be here. But if I like start low and they see the value of it, they're like, oh, this is really good music, or this is really good service. I want the music to be louder, or I want the service I want to pay you more, sort of thing. So, I mean, there's this balancing act between, you know, obviously if you totally undercut yourself and ask for way too little, then people are like, oh, they don't really value themselves, and so they're not really worth anything. But if you make them feel like you're being generous and you respect, like Brian, like you said, that they're what, it's genuine, like what they're doing is really precious to them, and you respect that. Like you're like, oh, this is just some stupid song, and I just got to get it recorded, get my money.
That's how I am. I do fine.
But yeah,
shut up and give me money.
respect and generosity go a long way with success.
And realize that there are some people that you'll run into that don't reciprocate. That's just different people, different persuasions. There's nothing wrong with that. Cool.
Yep.
Well, is there anything else from anybody else in the peanut gallery?
I think that's good. We didn't really talk too much about the good, fast, and cheap pick 2, but I think everything else ties into that. I mean, I think it's not like, it's a pretty simple concept that you don't have to beat,
No, and I mean, we kind of talked about all the aspects that surround that. I think the importance of that is understanding all of that other stuff so that no one gets screwed over, and being able to I guess making the title of this good, fast, and cheap pick 2 is kind of a little dishonest in some regards, because in reality it's about learning your own work and how to manage that in today's climate. And I mean, not even today's climate, but just like in general, like understanding the principles behind those things and how to manage those relationships, how to manage business agreements and everything, and not hurt people.
Mainly talked about like the more business side of things today, which I think is a good thing to bring up. So
yeah, I agree.
Yeah, providing value is really a lot of it.
So that both people feel like they've given and benefited from that exchange.
Yeah, you want to come out with like a win-win situation.
And if not,
feel like
you make sure that you win.
Win-win, right?
Don't let them win. Yeah. Always let you win if you have to. If they're not going to win, then you win. You always win. Always take care of number one. Number one. I'm just kidding. Okay. With that being said, now that I've gone off my last rant of the evening.
Mix good.
Ready? Mix good.
Mix good.
Mix not
good.
bad. All right.